Hey, campfire crew, let's get it on. Creepy Church Encounter by Fickle Language 3619. When I was 16 years old, I got approached by two women in my neighborhood who asked me if I wanted to know about Jesus. I felt bad walking away as they seemed nice, so I let them speak to me. They invited me to their church and told me to come that Friday night, and I invited my best friend at the time because I thought, what the hell, maybe we can learn something new about religion. When we got to the church, they made everyone sit down and played a PowerPoint presentation about motherly love. It was mostly about animals and how animal mothers have love for their babies. For some reason, it was hilarious, and me and my best friend at the time had to stop ourselves from laughing. The place was called the Church of God, and they basically believe God has two counterparts, and one is a woman called God the Mother. The two ladies I had spoken to had approached me at the end of the night and asked me if I wanted to get baptized next Sunday and give my life to God. I told them I needed to think about it because I still didn't know much about this religion and wasn't sure of my relationship with God yet. There was a high school English teacher I had who was Christian, and I began to tell him about this church and the whole Mother God thing. And he told me in all his years of Christianity he had never heard anything about God being a mother or a woman. He said to be wary of this church because it kind of sounded like a cult. After we had this conversation, I texted the main lady that was adamant about me getting baptized and told her I didn't think I wanted to do it. She got really angry and kept asking why. She told me I needed to do it and soon because if not, I would go to hell. I was only 16. She called me at least 20 times and left me even more text messages saying I needed to come back to the church next Sunday and get baptized before it was too late. I blocked her number. 2 weeks later, I saw her in my same neighborhood, but alone this time. When she passed me as we were walking, she noticed me and her facial expression turned extremely angry, and she got close to me and made these weird hand movements in my face. It looked like sign language, but aggressive. And she walked away. 4 years later, I ended up working at a coffee shop in my neighborhood. One day, I locked the wrong gate while closing up and forgot a key inside and wasn't able to lock the outer gate. My friend was with me, so she watched the store, and my boss told me to stop at her church down the block to get her copy of the key. It was the same church that I had gotten invited to in high school. It was 10 p.m. on a Saturday night, and I walked in hoping I wouldn't see the lady who tried to convert me, and I went to look for my boss. There were at least 50 women inside this church, all dressed up in wedding dresses with veils over their heads. No men were in the church that night. It looked like they were doing some weird ceremony. My boss told me to make sure this never happened again while giving me the key, and told me she didn't like being interrupted during church. As I left, I just kept thinking, what the hell type of ceremony were they doing? And why were they all dressed up as brides at 10 p.m. on a Saturday night? I did more research into this church after that, and found out it was actually a cult. There was always something about that lady who tried to get me to join that was just so creepy, though. Linkwood House by Caitlin 003. My stories go back to before I was even born, and as far back as I can possibly remember, up until now, was around 17 when I moved out. In Brackex, right outside of Elsmore, Delaware, I lived in a house on Linkwood Avenue that was built in the 1950s and sold to my grandparents in the late 80s. I am unfamiliar with the home's history before my grandparents, but I was told that when the house was first purchased, or shortly after, my grandfather had to remove 2 headstones that were put in the front yard by a big tree near the front porch. Apparently, my grandfather threw them beyond the backyard property line where there were tons of bamboo and train tracks. However, this was thought to be a random prank. Or maybe the prank part was covered up because my grandparents didn't want us believing or messing with the ghosts in our house. I was raised in a heavily religious family. My grandmother was old school Italian, the best cook you could ever meet, and she had the kindest heart you could imagine. Everyone who came into our house called her Mom because, well, that was just her personality in the best way, even to me. So I will refer to her as Mom here. To give a visual of the house, my mom collected porcelain dolls, angel figurines, and crosses. They were literally everywhere, decorating the entire house in a way that if there was an open space, it was taken with a clutter of some sort. Mom once was standing in the bathroom with the medicine cabinet mirror facing outward, doing her hair, and she was talking to my aunt who was standing in the doorway. Suddenly, she saw my dad standing behind my aunt in the hallway in the reflection of the mirror, and he was just staring off with an expressionless face. He was there, then he wasn't. So she said to my aunt, "Where did your brother go? He was just standing right there, and I needed to ask him something." My aunt proceeded to call my dad at a friend's home number, and it turns out my dad hadn't been home for several hours and certainly was not just standing behind my aunt in the doorway. This is the only story my mom ever told. The mom believed that the more you pay attention to things, the more occurrences happen. Both of my grandparents ended up passing away in that home, in the same bedroom. A pretty gruesome death, too. Both were battling cancer. There was also someone who had cut themselves pretty bad in our bathtub in more recent years. The person didn't die, but it was bad enough that lots of blood had to be cleaned up. After my mom died, we all slept in the living room together as a way to cope. None of us wanted to be alone. The night of Mom's funeral, I was trying to fall asleep, but I'd opened my eyes to see down the hallway, and in the reflection of this old oval mirror was her face staring back at me. She was wearing her favorite black robe and smiling. I never slept on the couch facing that way ever again. I had night terrors often, almost nightly. I was terrified all the time in the house growing up. I just felt watched constantly. I always felt uneasy. I always felt there was a presence. I slept with my mom in the same bed in a room every single night up until she passed away when I was 13. That room had a lot of activity. There would be nights where she would be asleep and I would watch as this black shadow thing would dance in the corners of the ceiling and then go away. The blanket covering my eyes was my best friend, and this happened so many times it almost felt routine and started to not frighten me anymore. One night, I was wide awake as she slept. I looked down to the foot of the bed and saw the figure of a woman standing there. It looked like a shadow, but I could tell it was a woman because it was in the shape of a woman and had her breasts in a curved figure. It also seemed to have some kind of wrap on its head. As a child, I figured this was a towel. This figure kept doing the weirdest dance at the foot of the bed. It was stomping its legs, and its arms were extended out vertically and moving up and down, and the figure would just turn in circles. This went on for I don't even know how long. Time stood still. I was just stuck staring at it and couldn't look away. I don't remember how it stopped, but all I could do was wrap my arm around my grandmother and fall asleep next to her, scared shitless, but not wanting to disturb her. During the day, I was in my bedroom minding my own business, playing with my Barbie dolls and dollhouse. The only two people that were home were me and Mom. She was at the front of the house in the living room watching her favorite show, while I was in the back of the house in my room. The bedroom door was open. Suddenly, right outside my door, I heard clear as day something whisper out loud, "Tell her! Just tell her!" I immediately dropped what I had in my hand and ran out of my room so quickly you'd think I was on fire. I told my mom what happened, but she just brushed it off, told me to go back and play. I assure you, there was nobody else home. There was no way it was Mom. She was at the other end of the house, and the whispers were so vivid, clear, and loud. I also didn't have a TV in my room yet. But from that day on, I shut and locked my bedroom door no matter what. There were several occasions that I would hear knocking at my bedroom door and would open it, and no one would be there. I hounded everyone in the house so many times and even asked to this day if anyone was messing with me, and they all swore up and down no. I would also hear my name be called a lot, and nobody was actually calling it. One morning as a teenager, I was sleeping facing the wall and hearing my name be called right in my ear. It woke me up out of a deep sleep, and I turned around almost immediately, but no one was there. My door was still shut, and it was locked before I fell asleep. This is one that creeps me out the most still to this day. I mentioned before that my mom collected porcelain dolls and that they were everywhere throughout the house, at least 100 of them. Well, my mom started buying me my own as well. First and foremost, they always creeped me out. I always felt like they were watching me, and it seemed like their eyes would follow me as I walked by them. There was a bride doll in my mom's room that looked just like her, and I was deathly afraid of it. I had night terrors of it a lot. Anyway, one day I was playing around with my porcelain doll. It had blue eyes, blonde hair, black pants, a black checkered top, and a cute little hat and purse. I had accidentally dropped it on the carpet, and it landed face down. For whatever reason, I apologized to it. I was a child. And then I picked it up. I faced it towards me, and I kid you not, it had a tear rolling down its cheek. I'm not making this stuff up, and I sort of wish I was. After I saw that, I put it back up on the shelf in my grandmother's room and never played with it or touched it again, or any of the other dolls for that matter. One day I was on my little swing set in the yard, just swinging away. Our yard was surrounded by woods. To my right there was a little opening. Well, out of nowhere, a man popped out and made me look up as I heard rustling of leaves. He was just standing there in this odd position. As a kid, I immediately thought it was some stranger trying to kidnap me or something, so I instantly ran forward as fast as I could into the house and shut and locked the glass door behind me. Nobody followed, and I didn't see anyone in the yard. I didn't tell my mom about this either because I didn't want to worry her. She was the only one home. I also didn't tell her because I ended up realizing that it was just an apparition. I know this because of the way the man was dressed. He was dressed exactly like someone from the late 1800s or early 1900s. Brown pants with suspenders, a white button-down shirt, boots, and a brown hat. He had shoulder-length, messy, light brown hair, and he had really tan skin, but also had dirt on his face. He honestly looked like a guy you would see on the show The Little House on the Prairie, which ironically was one of my mom's favorite shows. I don't think a kidnapper would be watching something like that in the early 2000s. Late at night one time, I was standing in the dark kitchen eating a snack as the dining room light filled behind me, illuminating my way. The kitchen had a fairly large window, and at the time I couldn't see anything out of it. It was pitch black. I could see the reflection of the kitchen wallpaper, and on it I saw two shadows pass by, one after the other. I looked behind me and nothing was there. This type of occurrence would happen frequently, seeing shadows out of the corner of my eye, but this occasion sticks out the most to me for some reason. Everyone had an imaginary friend as a kid, right? Well, I did, and I named mine Alicia for whatever reason. As I grew up, I went through a short phase of pretending Alicia was real. And remember earlier I mentioned that my mom once said the more attention you give it, the more active it is? Well, I found out she was absolutely correct. As I gave Alicia more attention, I felt as if I was being watched more and more, felt uneasy more and more. Now this right here still gives me chills today. When it was dinner time and I would get called to the table, I would say, "Come on, Alicia, time for dinner." And as I would walk to the kitchen, I would look behind me and see little footprints appear in the blue carpet behind me, following. This didn't happen every day, but it did happen several times. One day, I saw a girl's face in the reflection of the TV that I finally did get in my room, and that scared the living hell out of me seeing that. I figured it was Alicia. From that point on, I stopped giving Alicia attention, and I never saw footsteps again. 100% true, I can replay these memories in my head. I have not lived in that house since I was 17, and I'm almost 30 now. My father still lives in that house, but he says he doesn't have any encounters. However, I refuse to sleep in that house again. I refuse to go in alone at night. As soon as I walk in, every single time, I get this overwhelming shadow of a depression, and this negative energy floods over my entire body, and I immediately start to feel like I'm being watched again. There's definitely something in that house. I wanted to be ballsy and play with a Ouija board in there as an adult, but my dad won't allow it. Which, honestly, is probably a good thing. Creepy Acts of Kindness or Possible Stalker by Dark Moon 9090. I'm a 25-year-old female from England. I have to say I've never actually met this person. But this all started about 5 months ago, and first of all, it was quite a pleasant interaction. But slowly it got worse and more creepy. It started around November or October, and I noticed that my wing mirror on my car had been put inwards. I park a street away from my house, so I have a short walk back to my house. It's on a main road with one drive, and my parents park on the drive. I asked my mother if it was her, as it was a thoughtful thing to do. She said it wasn't her, and my father also said it wasn't him. So I thought it was just some kind soul or thoughtful person. After all, where I park is a lot of older people, and they always say good morning to me when I set off to work. This continued for months onwards, and it's only recently stopped since I started parking away from that side street. I asked a couple older people on that street, and they said it wasn't them. And at that point, I only wanted to say thank you. So I just continued going to work and didn't notice anything else until the winter weather got worse. December 2023 was when the weirdness continued. The frost kicked in and the snow started on occasions. Since I set off from work at 7 a.m., it could be frosty at that time, and I would need to de-ice my car. About mid-December, I remember running late for work. It was 7:15 a.m., and I still had not de-iced my car. So I was very careful in rushing to my car, as it was very cold and icy. When I got there, I saw it had been de-iced for me. I was confused and a little happy, but also kind of shaken. It was a strange feeling. Again, I asked my parents and anyone I saw on the side street. It wasn't any of them. My mom laughed and said, "You might have a secret admirer." Well, it was like she was a fortune teller. The de-icing of my car happened a few more times on very icy days. From January on is when it got strange to the point that I started parking elsewhere. At the end of January and the start of February 2024, I saw what I can only describe as homemade food left on top of my car. Don't worry, I didn't eat anything. I ended up throwing it away once I got to work. But I found the situation was getting beyond strange. Around the same time, the first note was left. It was written in what I would describe as doctor handwriting, and it was basically asking if I enjoyed being treated like, and I quote, "the princess I deserve to be treated like." I brought this home and showed my parents, and they didn't like it at all. My dad said he was going to start parking on the street and I could park in the drive for a while. I said that would be a good idea. However, if this person was looking for my car, then he would know which house was mine. And my dad agreed, but also pointed out that he or she may have already been watching me and already actually know where I'd live. He said the main thing was me walking home from my car to the house at 8:15, and I worked 12-hour shifts. He said he would sort the situation out if anything happened. I questioned going to the police, and he stated that they would laugh at us without any proof. He was right, we didn't have anything. But I didn't like the idea of parking back on the street, so I didn't. Now it's April. I stopped parking on the drive a few weeks ago, and now I've started parking on a different street close to my house. Nothing has happened since February, and I hope it doesn't, as it was starting to get worse. So, do I have a stalker, or just someone trying to fuck with me? Homeless Person in Our House by Lauren O. Disclaimer: I don't think all homeless people are scary or bad-intentioned or creepy. I do think my encounter with this homeless person in question was creepy, however. This happened in 2019, and I was 25 at the time. I was living with my parents, sister, and my partner, as we were saving up to buy a house. My parents' house was in a relatively big city in California, which has a big homeless population. The house was on a street that was a dead end to a park, which was a common hangout spot for homeless people. They were always walking by our house, and most of them never caused any problems. The other piece of backstory you need to know is that my sister has special needs. She, despite being 19 at the time, appeared both physically and mentally more like a 10-year-old. This particular day, my mom and I had taken our dogs to the vet. My partner was at work and my dad was working in the backyard, and this left my sister kind of alone in the house. When my mom and I came back from the vet, my sister opened the door and greeted us saying, "This is my friend Julia." Behind her stood a woman who looked like she was probably in her 20s. She had my sister's socks on and was eating food from our house. This was confusing because the woman could have been a friend of my sister's, as she was in a lot of programs for adults with special needs. We didn't necessarily know all of them. But my sister also has a limited vocabulary to explain situations. So my mom says to the woman, "Oh, you know my daughter?" Julia says, "We're getting to know each other." Nope. My mom says, "How are you getting to know her?" Julia answered, "Oh, well, I just live on the corner." "You live around the corner?" "No, I live on the corner. I needed a tampon, so your daughter let me in." At that point, my mom was speechless. I've never seen her speechless in my life, and I was whispering to her, "Get her out." Julia was kind of pacing around, grabbing more food from our kitchen. She was acting erratically like she was on drugs, and I again told my mom, "Get her the fuck out." My mom said, "I know that, but what if she has a knife or a gun or something? I need to do this carefully." My mom followed Julia into the kitchen and said, "I'm so sorry, you need to leave because I need to go run an errand." Julia ignored this request. At that point, I looked in our bathroom where there was a pile of Julia's things. And again, my mom told her she needed to leave. Julia agreed and went into our bathroom and locked the door. She was in there for a while, and it felt like forever, but it was probably around 5 minutes. We were pretty certain she was doing drugs. Finally, Julia had all of her stuff together and left, taking my sister's socks and more of our snacks with her. I ran to get my dad, and we all debriefed. It seemed like what we could get out of my sister was that Julia knocked on the door asking for a tampon, where my sister let her in, trying to be helpful. Julia then realized she was practically alone with what looked like a child and took full advantage, stealing clothes and later we found out shoes from us. We had a serious talk with my sister and told her she can never open the door for strangers again. We spent the next few months worrying that Julia would spread the news that our house was an easy house to get into. My Skinwalker Experience by Jendo Boy. Growing up, I lived in northeastern Arizona, literally about 5 miles south of the Navajo Reservation in Winslow. Naturally, being that close to the res, skinwalkers were a huge topic of conversation amongst the locals, and we all took it very seriously. Stories of personal experiences abounded, and mine were no different. To start off my set of stories, I was about 9 or so. My family had gone camping in a little spot about 50 miles or so south of a town called Hart Canyon, near Wiggins Crossing, if anyone's interested. We had been camping there all day, and I was extremely familiar with the area as we had camped there 20 or so times before. So my parents just let me wander about alone in the woods. This was back in the early 90s. Anyway, I had some G.I. Joes that I had been playing with in the nearby creek, about 80 yards from our campsite. There were no other campers there with us, and my mom had called me back to camp for dinner, so I left and ate. Then I played around camp for a while and realized that I'd forgotten my toys back at the creek, so I took a flashlight and headed back that way. I knew right where I had left them, so in no time at all I found them and grabbed them up. As I squatted down to grab them on the edge of the water, a sudden urgency that I'd never felt before ran down my spine. I remember feeling frozen because of the fear. You know, like the little boy on E.T. when the alien comes out of the field for the first time and he's trying to scream for his family. I looked up and pointed my flashlight to the other side of the creek, and about 10 yards down the way, I saw something. At first I thought it was a deer, but it was standing up, so I thought maybe it was a bear. But it was too skinny and didn't have enough poofy hair. It slunk behind a tree and then peered out slightly at me. I seriously was too scared to move. I had just read a bit about Bigfoot for the first time, since it wasn't really popular in my area, and I thought for a long time that that's what I saw. I'd finally seen enough to gather my wits and scrammed out of there as fast as I could and went back to camp. I told my parents and they kind of dismissed it as my imagination, so I just stayed close to them for the rest of the trip. About 2 years later, I was at my house. I had 2 dogs, and they were outside dogs and lived their whole lives in my backyard. One night, they went psycho, barking first at something in the alley behind my house, but then they both started whimpering. I had my window open slightly, and one of my dogs straight up jumped onto the window. Frantically, he started chewing through the screen of the window, then forced his way into the house and would not leave the house for 3 days. Another time, when I was about 13, we used to play night games in the town. Mostly, there not being anything else to do, we would walk around our neighborhood and act suspicious so the cops would come chase us around, and then we would run down the alleyways and hop into random folks' backyards to hide. Now, it was extremely common to see an intoxicated Navajo or Hopi in the alley, or on the street, so it was no big deal to see one in the alley behind my house that night, as we, being 2 friends of mine and myself, ran from a police car hot on our tail. We saw this guy plain as day standing in our way, and we ran around him and jumped into the nearest yard to hide, and we waited for the cop to pass and then hopped back out. Literally, about 3 minutes went by. We ran back the way we came, and as we got to the point where the Indian had been, he was gone. Legit, in his place, was a coyote sitting there watching us. We ran right past it, feet from it, and anyone who knows coyotes know they will bail out way before you get close to them. This bugger held his ground and calmly sat and watched us run past him. We all freaked out and stayed inside for a month. My last experience was when I was about 15 or 16. My brother had a girlfriend that lived in a small community south of Winslow called Starlight Pines, about 25 miles away. Well, we went to go see her one day, and as we drove out, about 15 miles away, we saw an Indian guy standing on the side of the road, which was quite odd because the res was north of town, and it was rare to see anyone on foot south of town because it's just desert and forest for literally 80 miles. Anyway, we saw this guy. He looked normal enough, flannel shirt and jeans. We got to our destination and hung out with my brother's girlfriend and her family well into the night before deciding to head back home. We hopped in his truck, a Chevy S10, and drove back the way we came. In the same spot, we saw the Indian dude. He was still there. I remember thinking, that dude is crazy standing out there all day and into the night. What's he doing? Right as we passed him, we heard a loud bang on the back of the truck. At first, I thought we hit an animal, but I hadn't felt anything that we'd run over. I turned around and looked out the back window. My brother started to slow down, thinking there may be something wrong with the truck. But in the brake lights, I saw the Indian guy chasing after us. We were easily going 55 or 60 at this point as we were about to stop. The guy was on the road, just feet behind us. I screamed at my brother to not stop. Gun it, man, gun it. He did, and being a Chevy S10, it had a speed governor on it at 80. 2 miles to go. 2 miles. And this guy kept up with us. We were seriously freaking out. I asked my brother what if we didn't make it back to the town, or what about when we have to slow down once we get close to town? After that 2-mile stretch that seemed to last forever, I looked back, and the guy was gone. We got home, booked it into the house, and told our parents. The next morning, I got up to head somewhere and looked at my brother's truck thinking about the night before, and I wondered what the loud bang was just before we started getting chased. Inspecting the truck, I found a handprint smeared in the dust from about 2/3 over to the right, then smeared to the right taillight. I never went out to Starlight Pines again. Creepy Cleaning Lady with a Crush, submitted by Rosie O'Flannel. This happened to my family in the late 1990s. My mom had recently changed jobs, and my dad, who busted his ass 6 to 7 days a week at his job, decided that outside of our weekly chores, they were going to hire someone to do a deep clean of our house every other week. We still had to do our own laundry, clean the bathrooms and our rooms once a week, and shit like that as our chores. When I say we, I mean my sister and me. I was 17 when this all went down, and she was 19 and at college, so she was only home on breaks and in the summer. The rents hired this older woman who was the sweetest thing in the world. She was wicked nice and only complained about my chew spit cups I would occasionally leave in my room. Other than that, she was a peach. But halfway through my senior year of high school, she got sick and turned her business over to her daughter, a 30-something woman who was nice but a little odd. She had recently divorced, and whenever I bumped into her, which was rare, she usually had some complaint about life involving her ex. Like I cared. Anyway, one day I came home early from baseball practice and took a shower in our downstairs bathroom. I knew she was there because her Mustang was parked in the street. I just got cleaned up, threw on some shorts, and then went upstairs to get a t-shirt. I heard her in my room with the door closed, and when I went in there, her back was to me, or should I say, her backside. She was vacuuming and listening to a Walkman, but I had to notice that she was only wearing a pair of pink satin panties and my football jersey. I didn't know what to do, so I just backed out of the room and went to my dad's closet to grab a shirt, and then I ran back downstairs. She came down a little while later with normal clothes on, with a look on her face that read, "I wonder if I've been busted." I didn't say anything other than hi, and she looked relieved. She took off after a while later, and I wondered if I should say anything to anyone. I thought about telling my girlfriend, but my girlfriend was a total hothead, super feisty, and I know she would have flipped out. I ended up telling my best friend Chris, who called bullshit until he came over to my house and picked up my jersey, and it smelled like her perfume. He said I should totally bang the cleaning lady. I'll call her Jen, by the way, and I just laughed. Of course, then he said, "Hey, I've seen her. She's got a wicked body, and she's not that bad to look at." Again, I laughed and told him to fuck off. But then things got weird. I started to see Jen all over the place. At the movies when I was hanging out with my girlfriend. At a pizzeria I worked at. All over the place. Not kidding. At the store, getting gas. There's Jen. I chalked it up to being a coincidence. I mean, my town wasn't that big. But a couple of weeks later, though, I was playing a game and looked into the stands for my family. My sister had just gotten home from college, and she and my parents were in the stands watching me. I waved at them, and then saw Jen. She was sitting at the far end of the bleachers, away from my family. Okay, I thought, this is getting weird. Nothing else happened, and summer came. My parents were going on vacation and taking my sister with them, while I stayed home and worked my job slinging pizzas, trying to save for college. On a day that Jen had cleaned our house, I got home late from work, showered, and then grabbed a few beers from my dad's stash and went to my room to watch some TV before bed. My girlfriend called, and while we were talking, I put my hand behind my head on my pillows and felt something. My girlfriend was blathering on about some stupid shit I didn't care about. And when I pulled my hand back, I was holding a pair of pink satin panties. Out loud, I actually said, "Ruh-roh," in a Scooby-Doo voice, and my girlfriend asked me what was wrong. I didn't say anything about them, and said I'd just spilled my beer. We made plans for the next night, and I hung up. I immediately called Chris and told him what I'd found. He started laughing his ass off, and I told him, "Man, this isn't cool. I mean, in some John Hughes movie this would have been a fun plot, but I thought it was creepy that I was seeing her everywhere, she was wearing my shit in my house, and now she's leaving her panties in my room." Eventually, he did say it was fucked up that a 30-year-old was doing this, regardless of how cute she was. Anyway, that weekend I was finishing up at work around 11 o'clock, and when I went into the parking lot, there was only one car out there. It was a red Mustang GT. Jen's. I started to turn another way to make my way home, and her voice called out, "Hey, want a lift?" I thought for a second, my horny lower half thinking, "Yeah, this is a good idea," with my brain saying, "Don't be an idiot." I said, "No thanks, I've got to stop at the convenience store, but thanks, Jen." I quickly made my way across the street and went inside the store. My friend Bill was working, and he always snuck me beer, so I got a few talls and then looked into the parking lot. It was empty. I hung out talking to Bill for a little while longer, and then I made a beeline for home and got inside. I locked the doors and showered up, thinking about all this stuff that was going on. I went to my room, but before I went into my parents' room to tell them I was home. But then I remembered they were gone for the weekend on another trip. I sat down with a beer and called my girlfriend. I was going to spill the beans, but I just got her answering machine. After I left a message and hung up, I sat in the dark for another minute sipping a beer, and a voice said, "Ah, young love is so sweet." I nearly shit, I was startled so much. Standing on the other side of my bed, and I hadn't even noticed her up until this point, was Jen. In the light from the window, I could see she was wearing some sort of shiny nightgown. "What the fuck are you doing here?" I yelled. And she just said, "Such language for such a nice young man." I told her she needed to leave, and that if she just left me alone, I wouldn't say anything about her weird behavior. Jen walked around the bed and said, "You're an insolent young one. Do you need a spanking?" Before I could say anything, I heard a clicking noise and she jumped at me. I put my arms up, but she tried to kiss me and was laughing the whole time. God's honest truth, I wasn't horny or turned on. I was freaked out that she was doing this and was in my room. I pushed her down on the floor and ran out of my room, and she just laughed. I flew downstairs and called the cops and told them that a woman was in my house. I knew who she was, but I wanted her gone. I'm sure I wasn't clear with what I was saying, but they told me to get to a room where she couldn't get to. So I took the cordless phone into the basement and heard her walking around upstairs, and then I heard our back door close. The cops showed up a few minutes later, and I told them everything that had been going on. When they came inside, I took them to my room, and they found a pair of handcuffs on the floor and asked if they were mine. I said, "Hell no." And then one cop asked why I had beer in my room. Way to go, Sherlock. I had a crazy woman in my house, and all you care about is some beer, I thought. Just then, my sister came home and asked what the hell was going on. She verified that we knew who Jen was, and we both gave her a description, and a description of her car. The cop didn't say anything else about the beer, thank God. They radioed the description or whatever it is that they do, and they said they were going to send someone back the next day, and that I needed to tell my parents as they were going to be calling them at the place they were staying. I called them right when the cops left and told my dad the whole thing. The time I saw her wearing my clothes, the panties, which I still had, all the times I saw her around town, the whole nine. My dad said to calm down and that my parents were coming home immediately. They were about an hour away. My sister told me to stash the beer and brush the hell out of my teeth so as not to get caught drinking when they got home. And right when my parents did get home, a cop car pulled up too. A cop got out and started talking to my dad, and then they called me over. "Is this the woman who was in your room?" he asked me and shined his flashlight on Jen, who was in the back seat of his car, makeup smeared and still wearing the shiny nightgown. I said, "Yeah, that's her." The cop said, "Okay," and then pulled my dad away to talk to him and my mom some more. Apparently, they found her driving around, and she was a little more than 3 sheets to the wind. She also had a backpack in her car with a Polaroid camera and a whole bunch of pictures of me. Playing baseball, playing football, on my wrestling team, with my girlfriend, hanging out with friends in the village, and then a whole bunch of herself at our house wearing my clothes, and a few servicing herself while laying on my bed. She also had duct tape and a huge butcher knife in the bag. The whole thing was tripped out, and I had to make all these statements to the court over the next few weeks. My parents pressed charges, but all that came out of this was a DWI, a restraining order for me, my family, and our house, and all she ended up getting was probation. We never saw nor heard from her again after that, and while I laugh about it now, it was not funny at the time. I was constantly looking over my shoulder for her for months afterwards. Yeah, the handcuffs were hers, and while I don't think she would have tried to kidnap me, I do wonder what might have happened if I had done something to piss her off, or if she was crazier than we knew, and had other plans. I don't know. I have my own family now, but I will never have a cleaning lady. I've had a hard time selecting babysitters for my kids. It goes to show you that even though nothing terrible happened to me, the fear that something could happen to your family stays with you forever. My Dad's Story by Dreambird. As a little girl growing up in the 70s, I had a pet guinea pig. My two sisters and I each had our own guinea pigs, and we loved those little guys. Mine, unfortunately, got sick and passed away. I was devastated. My dad got a shoebox, which we decorated, and then placed the deceased guinea pig in. Dad even made a little cross for the grave, and we staged a little funeral in our backyard. After the funeral, I stood there alone staring at the new grave with tears rolling down my cheeks. All of a sudden, something popped up out of the ground where the guinea pig was buried and ran towards the woods before vanishing before my very eyes. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It was in the shape of my guinea pig, and while part of it still appeared solid, another part seemed to be transparent. It almost looked gelatinous, if that makes sense. A small sprout near the makeshift grave actually moved as the shape moved by it. I know what I had seen was real. My heart beat fast as I stood there, unsure what to do. I grew up in a Catholic household, and we were taught that animals don't have souls. I knew that wasn't true based on this experience, and others that were to come later on in life. The first person I told was my younger sister, who told me to stop lying. I remember trying so hard to convince her through my tears that this really happened. We're both in our 50s now, and to this day, I don't think she believes any of this. But later on that day, my dad was out front mowing the lawn. When he saw me crying, he shut the mower off and came over to see me and see how I was doing. I told him what had happened, with some reluctance. Much to my surprise, he believed me. He relayed the following story to me. As a young boy growing up in southern Connecticut, we lived in Massachusetts at the time, he and his older brother were camping in a makeshift tent in the backyard of my grandparents' house during the summer, and this had all happened in the 50s. The house was built on a hill and was the only one in the area for quite some time. My grandfather built the house with the garage facing the backyard. When more houses went in, the street was placed to the other side of the house, so it was an odd spot for a garage door. The point of these details is to describe how rural the area was at the time. As my dad and uncle slept in this tent, which was most likely a large blanket draped over a rope, my dad said a bright light appeared outside. He woke up, rubbed his eyes, and then peered outside. There stood a very old man in robes with a long white beard, and he was holding a staff. The light he saw from the inside of the tent was actually emanating from this entity. My dad said he was frozen in fear, and the man just stood there watching him. He didn't speak or make a sound. When Dad finally got the courage up, he scrambled back into his bed. He tried to wake up my uncle, but to no avail, so he just burrowed under the covers and closed his eyes, willing the apparition to leave. In the morning, he told my uncle what had happened, as well as his parents, and of course, no one believed him. To this day, he swears this happened, and I believe him. What is interesting to me is wondering what the entity wanted or what its purpose was. Was it a guardian of some sort? What throws me is the robes and the staff. Almost sounds biblical and not something historically seen in what was once a rural area of Connecticut. My dad is now in his late 70s and has only been given a few more months to live due to cancer and an advanced stage of Parkinson's disease. I like to think that this spirit is a guardian, or maybe an angel that will help him over to the other side, when his time comes. Hey gang, thanks for listening to this episode of Uncle Josh's True Scary Stories. If you have a true scary story of any nature that you'd like to hear narrated on this channel or podcast, email it to UncleJoshTrueScaryStories@gmail.com. I read them all. Thanks to anyone who sent me in a story, and thanks for those of you who have let me read your stories. Always a lot of fun, and I hope everyone enjoyed listening to them. If you haven't already, please like and subscribe to my channel. That helps out a lot. If you can leave a comment, I respond as quick as I can. And of course, follow me on social media. Links to that are in the description below. If you'd like to take your support of the channel a little further, find my link to my Patreon page and my storefront at tpublic.com. Links to that are below. Get yourself some Uncle Josh and Campfire Crew merchandise. Planning on doing a live campfire, so stick around for that. I've got a fun idea that I got from an old radio show that I listened to that was really, really cool. So stick around for information on that. Everyone, be excellent to each other. And until next time, be wary of things that go bump in the night. It could be anything. A ghost, a monster, or the guy next door.